Okay, so here we are with a new video, and it's going to be the 2008 430 Scuderia. We'll have a quick walk around. It is a example in Grigio alloy. Pretty standard car, but a couple of things to point out. It's got the tinted taillights, HRE wheels, lowered factory suspension. We do have an S-line exhaust in there with Capristo headers, and that's pretty much it. Otherwise, it's a very standard car. Go and check out the interior. It's a tint of blue. I think it's called Blue Scurio. Alcantara carbon fiber. It's got the mesh pattern seats. Let's go for a drive. So we're inside the 2008 430 Scuderia. This particular car has about 14,000 miles. It is an 08, but with all the carbon package. So the headlights are carbon, the rear diffuser is carbon. It's equivalent to an 09 car, which really the only difference was a carbon package I think came standard. But anyway, these cars were only made for a couple years, between 08 and 09. They were, in my mind, the pinnacle of Ferrari's racetrack performance cars. These cars are very bare bone. They take after the Challenge Stradale, so they took out a lot of the creature comforts, a lot of the sound deadening material. You have exposed metal plate on the floors. You know, there's no carpeting or any sound deadening materials. For the most part, it's really just left as raw as it's possibly able to make the car. Let's go for a drive. So if you followed my previous videos, you'll know that the 430 was a car that I really aspired to get. This is probably right about the beginning of the 458, and the 458 came to market. I had the yellow 360, and I know I wanted a Scuderia, mainly because when the 458 was released, it was far from my favorite Ferrari. I didn't really like the design of the 458. I still don't. I'm pretty sure it's a great car to drive. Everybody who's driven one has only had praises for it. It's got an 9,000 RPM red line, and you know, the Porsche GT3 that I have goes to 9,000 as well, and it's a screamer when you get to that edge of the tachometer. And so I can only imagine what a 458 is like, especially in the speciality form. But this particular one, you know, I mean, there's so many things to like about it, but one of the main things to talk about is the F1 transmission. So the Challenge Stradale was sort of a graduation from the F1 that was introduced on the 355. And from what I understand, the F1 and the 355, and in fact you can say the 360, were very laggy. I've personally never driven the F1 transmission in either of those cars, nor have I driven an F1 in a standard 430. But I imagine that it probably got refined as each generation came to be. But where they really pushed the limits of it was the Scuderia. The F1 in here shifts just about as fast, I think, as a dual clutch. I mean, there's still a little lag, but it's almost indecipherable. I mean, you know, when I'm driving the GT3, that one is a dual clutch, right? And this one, as far as shifting gears, isn't too far behind in terms of speed. There's not even a noticeable difference in lag between driving that car and this car. Not enough to where I can really notice it. I mean, you're talking about milliseconds here, so you know, it's not that big of a deal. This particular car, it it shifts with an abruptness that lets you know its intentions. It's not a gentle car to drive slow. This car really likes to be driven like it's almost on track, but it's a very enjoyable drive as well. Now there's no valves to open in this exhaust. It's just a one-stage exhaust. This is an S-line exhaust. It's a straight-through exhaust. So there's no valves, there's no buttons to push that gives it a quiet mode. It's always in this loud mode all the time. It's a very high-pitched scream when you get up there. You know, all Ferraris are really. Although I imagine what came after the 458, the 488, and the F8 Tributo, and now the 296, I'd imagine they probably lose a little bit of that top-end pitch, being that they're turbo models, right? So, to me, this is kind of the last of the naturally V8 Ferraris that I wanted to own. I'm not a fan of the 458. In other words, I'm not that big of a fan of the Speciality, just mainly because of the way it looks. And I also would probably venture to say the way it shifts. I imagine the 458 generation shifts very smooth, and it's not, you know, without having a chance to drive that car, I don't know that I could discount it and say I don't want it absolutely. But in terms of having this V8 that's naturally aspirated, I'm very content with this experience. It doesn't make me want a 458 Speciality. I think if anything, it makes me curious about the 488 Pista. That hardcore track version might be the next desirable Ferrari for me in terms of its V8 platform that I care to own. So who knows? Maybe I'll pick one of those up sometime in the future. Although I've mentioned before in other videos, a V12 Ferrari is something I would love to experience. So like an 812 Superfast would be high on my list. So this car has a very unique history to it and how I came to acquire this car. So I came close to buying a Scuderia maybe about 4 times. And ended up getting this one on the 4th try. But I've been hunting for a Scuderia for a better part of about a year and a half. Each time, at least for the previous 3 attempts, were always red on black. I've always kind of imagined that I want to have a red Ferrari, just like everybody else, for the most part, wanted at least once in their life, right? So when the Scuderias became available, you know, they were also kind of a rare species as well. So it wasn't easy to always come across them, and to come across that red one was also pretty difficult. There were quite a few black cars, but I think that black on the 430 Scuderia hides the aggressive lines a little too much. So, you know, I wanted a color other than black. But how I got this car, when I moved into where I moved to, there was a house that was about maybe five or six homes down from me. And I remember driving home one day, and the guy's garage was up, and he had a couple Ferraris in there. He had the 599, and he had a Scuderia. Now, what was interesting was, you know, where I live, you kind of see the repetition of cars in your neighborhood. So I knew just kind of who, you know, what color Scuderias were available or were driving around. And there was a yellow, there was a couple reds, a black, but there was a silver, and that happened to be in my neighbor's garage. Now, fast forward to when I bought my car, which was maybe about a year and a half after I moved to where I moved to, when I was really looking forward to buying a Scuderia. I saw one being advertised at the Ferrari dealer, but it was blue. So, you know, the condition was good, the price was fair, and I was lucky enough to be in a position where I could get into a Scuderia. Now keep in mind, I had to get rid of my 360 as a trade-in to make up that difference. Now, when I went to go look at the car, I had it, of course, checked out and everything. It was a Ferrari dealer, and so, you know, that gave me some comfort in understanding the background of the car and the history of the previous owner in terms of how they took care of it and the condition it was in. So I went ahead and I struck a deal with the dealer, and during the PPI time frame, I've asked for a Carfax. And this car was a one-owner car before my ownership, and it was registered in the same city that I was in. And what was interesting was, you know, like I said, I kind of had an idea of what color Scuderias were in their neighborhood, but I never had seen a silver one on the street. But I got to know the owner, and it never occurred to me that this actually was his car. He wanted to sell the car and move on to something else, and we never connected in terms of, I never really told anyone I was looking for a Scuderia, so he never mentioned to me that he was selling one. And I never put two and two together, because the day that I saw it in his garage, it was a bit overcast, right? The lights in the garage weren't on, so it gave this car a silvery tone. But in fact, when the sunlight hits this car, it has a more bluish tone. So this car kind of changes color on you a little bit depending on the time of day you're looking at it. And again, what was interesting was this car was only literally 6 homes down from where I live. So I guess you can say we're keeping it in the neighborhood. Now, depending on how you watch my videos, you'll know that in my 360 video, you know, when I traded my 360 towards this car, I've had this car for a good period before I bought a second 360, which was in the other video that I made. As much as I love the F1 shifting and how great this car is, I still really, really crave the stick shifted experience, and so I ended up buying that second 360. But getting back to this car, you know, this is a very easy car to maintain as far as ownership goes. It doesn't have the rubber belts like the 360, so you don't have to get the belts changed every so many years. But it's an easy car to maintain. It's an easy car to own, and it's a hell of a fast car to drive. I have to say that there's a little bit of hesitation these days to drive this car, because the value of these have really skyrocketed. I think at the peak of the pandemic, these things started going for about $300,000 or above, and I think they're probably came down a little bit, but not too far off. And so where I live, I should mention that, you know, there's a lot of older people, and they're not always careful when they drive. So sometimes many times I had people veer into my lane and I had to either brake or swerve to avoid them. But it doesn't, you know, it doesn't give me a little peace of mind to go out for a quick blast. I mean, I'm always kind of on the lookout for any kind of near-term collisions that I have to avoid. But in any case, when I do get the chance to take this out, I mean, it's an awesome car to drive, right? It corners great. The sound that it makes is fantastic. You know, there's not much of the jerkiness in this car. It's got the carbon ceramic brakes. This generation and on, this carbon ceramic brakes were probably starting to become more like the steel brakes in that they had modulation to them. My Superleggera Gallardo, and I've heard to some extent the Charlie Strujali carbon ceramic brakes that were available to those cars were very, very difficult to modulate. So you sometimes can't just slowly coast to a stop. You almost have to slam on the brakes to make it stop. But these brakes feel a little more natural. You know, I never take my cars on the track. I don't intend to. but I still protect my cars, all of them. Like this particular one has full expel PPF, the entire car. You know, it's just something I wanna do for the longevity of this car. It's a beautiful car. It's a rare color car. I think I've seen maybe 3. I mean, I know of 3 in this Grigio alloy color. I think I've seen one in Europe and another one in the States, in terms of seeing them online. So this is one of those cars where I think in the Ferrari lineup hasn't quite gotten its due yet. You know, the Challenge Scuderia is a car that gets a lot of attention in the Ferrari community. It's a very appreciated car. It's kind of the first hardcore track version cars in Ferrari's history that's made for the road. And then it kind of skipped over the Scuderia, which to me is a bit surprising. You know, it was the speciality that got a lot of praise after that, and then of course the Pista. But I think, I do wonder if it's just because people haven't really gotten to experience this car. You know, the 360 chassis is an older chassis, so I imagine the 360 Scuderia, you know, based off that chassis, still has that older chassis feel. This car, although it shares very much with the 360 platform, it feels, you can tell it's another generation ahead. This engine has a lot more power, or at least it feels like it has a lot more power. The 360 alone has 400 horsepower. The Challenge Scuderia I think is about 420, and I believe the Scuderia is pushing a bit north of 500. So you do have more noticeable power, more noticeable torque. So this car picks up certainly much faster. And then of course you get to the speciality and so on. But again, I think what really makes this car noticeable and worth its sort of place in Ferrari history is that it has this super fast F1 transmission. And I would have maybe appreciated the speciality a little more if it had this transmission. I think it just adds to the character. It's not the smoothest thing to drive when you're going sort of at legal limits or legal speeds, but if you get to open it up and you shift, this thing just, I mean, it engages like a pistol. It's that quick. There's shift lights here on top of the steering wheel, the LED lights that kind of indicate when you are supposed to shift. And you have a Manettino here where you can change it into driving of different modes. I have it on race. I don't really need any of the traction control stuff off, so race is usually the mode that I drive it in. This is also not another car that I listen to the stereo in. This one has a hi-fi system. I don't think it has Bluetooth, but it does have a CD disc slot here. Not something I use, nor do I care to use. This exhaust really opens the car up. The Capristo headers, why did I get that? Well, because 430 and the 360 have been known to have weak headers, and that over time they deteriorate and sometimes can crack or have issues where particles of the material get sucked into the engine or into the cats and cause some issues. So aftermarket headers are certainly a way to go. I think it definitely changes the sound, and you know, does it give any performance? I don't know. I mean, this car is so quick that it's hard to tell when you gain another 5 or 10 horsepower, if that. So where does this car sit in my lineup? Well, you know, it's by a happy accident that these values have gone up. You know, I've spoken to many people who in the collector's world say that this still has a lot of room to grow. Could we see a $500,000 value on these someday? I don't know. I mean, depending on who you talk to, there's only about maybe 1,500 of these that were produced. You know, nobody knows what the future holds, but if you're talking about desirability, I think this has got to be up there with any of these special Ferraris. Now, I wish I could probably mount this camera outside so you can hear what it sounds like on the outside, but you know, I don't think this camera attachment can hold on. I was trying to make a video where I was trying to capture the sound of the Capristo exhaust on the 360, and the attachment fell off. So I had to go back and try to find this camera back on the road, and luckily enough I did, but unfortunately I'm not daring enough to attach this outside again. So, but anyway, yeah, I'm thinking that this thing will stay in the collection. I have plenty of cars to drive, fortunately, that you know, this one just doesn't get driven that much. Am I holding this to a garage clean status? I kind of am. You know, I hate to say it, but I had a couple close calls with this car where people almost swerved into the lane and caused me to swerve, and if I wasn't so careful, this car would have sustained damage. So you know, it's something I want to preserve. To me, this car is a piece of art, and you know, I feel like I'm the caretaker of it until it moves on, if it moves on. You know, cars like this don't get made much anymore. I think the Ferrari lineup has kind of shown that they're going hybrid, and in fact with a smaller engine with the 296. You know, I don't know that those kind of cars can ever sound like this. So I think this car will hopefully get its accolades. Not that it doesn't, but I hope it's going to catch up into the same level as you would expect for a Speciale. I think this car probably, you can argue, is even more raw than Speciale. So I think it probably gives you sort of the last unique experience of how raw cars were made. Keeping in mind with the 458, they even took creature comforts of the standard 430 to another level. So the Speciale, in terms of it becoming a track car, became that from even a higher, more creature comfort oriented car. I would argue that this car, there's really no creature comforts in here. I mean, the AC works, which is great. It's a stiff riding car, so you know, you're gonna have this bumpy road suspension feature where you can soften it up. For me, I like the more stiffer suspension feel, so I always keep it in that. But yeah, so anyway, let me know if you have any questions or comments. I'll try to make another video, or if I can find another attachment that keeps the camera on, I'll try to capture the sound a little more. But anyway, I'll see you guys in the next one.